Good morning, everybody. This is Carrie Getz with another edition of our podcast series. Today, we're lucky enough to have David Maimon on here, and he's going to talk about this really cool new program that's going on over at Georgia State with the National Science Foundation, and some scholarships are there. So, David, welcome first.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself and then a little bit about the program.
So my name is David, as you mentioned, and I'm a professor in Georgia State University. I work for the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice, but I have another appointment with the Computer Science Department in campus. I joined Georgia State 2 years ago. Back then, before my current position, I held a position in the University of Maryland, doing my work there. But then Georgia State, approached and asked me to come and develop this really cool program around evidence-based cybersecurity. So here I am now, 2 years after, with a fairly large group of scholars and students, I may add, who are working on various aspects of evidence-based cybersecurity, trying to understand what works and what doesn't in the context of cyberspace. My PhD is in sociology, so I'm not a techie. At least I wasn't a techie before I was, before I started doing what I do right now. But during the last 11 years or so, I've been doing cybercrime and cybersecurity research, and I'm thrilled and excited to have made that switch.
Yeah, so this is just such a great field anyway. Cybersecurity is definitely not going away. It's all in the headlines. Every time there's a big breach, you hear about it. The recent one with Twitter, and a lot of the Twitter accounts turned out to be a 17-year-old kid. Go figure. But I think that this is one of those really great things. And one of the cool components about this that I really liked about this program is that it actually matches students with chief security officers to do some of this work. So tell us a little bit about how this vision of yours and the colleges came about, and how you guys started this program.
Well, I think it's a great question. As I indicated, I first joined Georgia State two years ago, and then during this process of building the group, we decided to have our own advisory board to the group, and the advisory board is essentially composed out of people from the industry. We have LexisNexis CISOs, we have people from the Atlanta Federal Bank, we have very well-respected individual within the industry. And when we have put together the advisory board, the reason for doing that was essentially try to understand what is it that the industry needs in terms of our skills in educating students, right, in order to conduct cybersecurity research, and students who could actually start working for the industry the minute they join a company. So we sat with our advisory board, and they came up with the idea of having a program in which we will take our students, we will teach them about our evidence-based cybersecurity approach, and simultaneously we will marry them with chief information security officers in large organizations and their team in order to implement the approach in the context of the organization's cybersecurity efforts. And by that, the organization will benefit from the approach, while the students benefit from some of the practical skills that the employers and cybersecurity teams around the country are essentially desperate for. That is essentially where the idea came from. And when we dive deeper and deeper into trying to find justification for this program, it was fairly easy to find, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we know that companies do not really allow students and people who are outside of the organization access to the cybersecurity infrastructure, and so it's very complicated for cybersecurity scholars as well as for those companies to really assess what works and what doesn't. So by having those students using our infrastructure in order to assess some of the questions that the companies had with respect to policies and tools, the industry really appreciate that. And another challenge that we were able to address with this program is, the attempt to implement scientific research in a rigorous way in the context of the cybersecurity discipline, right? I mean, so all these challenges we figured we will be able to address with our program, and we applied for. We submitted an application to NSF, and we were very happy to hear that NSF decided to support it.
Yeah, and I think some of these public-private partnerships and what's going on in some of the colleges is really needed because we've heard this time and time again on the podcast series that curriculum is a very slow moving machine and technology's not. Technology moves way faster than a lot of this. And that's why a lot of companies are stepping up with certifications and sending people through different certification programs because in a lot of cases, the technology that's being taught is, 5, 10 years old because that's when the curriculum was approved. So things like this, I think, are really cool because it does sort of shove you out in the forefront a bit for some of the newer things that are happening.
I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, and this is again, this comes from the conversations we have and we had with our advisory board and people from the field. Right? I mean, the major challenge that folks in the industry experienced with hiring our students was the huge gap between the theoretical knowledge that the students have and the practical skills. And so our program is all about trying to bring both the theoretical knowledge and the practical skills. In fact, our advisory board and the chief information security officers who will decide to participate in this program will pretty much help us to design the curriculum. I mean, they will tell us exactly what the industry essentially needs in terms of their new new employees' knowledge, and based on that, we will able to teach the students this specific knowledge and practical skills. So it'll be academians, it will be chief information security officers and their team getting together, deciding on the curriculum, deciding on the tools that we want to teach, deciding on the technology that is commonly used right now, or heavily used, I would say, right now by most of the organization. And that, in a way, will determine what we will teach our students.
And that's really important too, from a finding new talent in the industry standpoint. I mean, about 30% of this industry is going to gray out within the next 5 years or retire. And attracting new people to the industry, there's sort of a misnomer that in order to be in tech, you have to write code. And we hear that all the time, even though there's lots and lots of other positions. And certainly cybersecurity is one that is never, ever going to go away because people have to protect their data wherever that data exists, and the unscrupulous types don't slow down in their efforts to gain access. And we've seen this recently, with some of the ransomware attacks on small towns and places and entities that thought that nobody's really interested in my stuff. Turns out they're really interested in their stuff because there's money involved in stealing that stuff. So bringing in CISOs, I think, and for those listening that don't know what that is, that's a chief information security officer. But bringing in that CISO suite and that C-level suite and understanding really what their pain points are and what that curriculum needs to look like, especially being able to add that practical application knowledge is huge. When years ago, the deal was it really didn't matter if somebody had a degree or not. People were more interested in the skills that they brought to the table. And somehow we flipped around where the degree was the first thing, and it really didn't matter if somebody had skills, which is kind of backwards and really harmful to a lot of people that have had to drop out to be a caregiver or because they couldn't afford the student loans anymore and had to work. And they literally are getting that hands-on day-to-day experience. So I think being able to marry those two together just really, really gives a leg up to the talent that's coming in there. And the fact that there's scholarships around this is also really great. And I would add, on top of this scholarship, there's also organizations like As Is. I'm an outreach officer for Mississippi and Louisiana for the junior college and colleges, and there's scholarship money available there to help and piggyback with some of this. So one of the things that we really highlight in this podcast is anywhere we find really cool scholarship money, we talk about it. So tell us a little bit about the scholarship component with your program and how that all got funded and how many students you've been able to help.
So I think, Kerry, you bring a very important point. I mean, at the end of the day, and maybe before I'll sort of answer this specific question, I will just comment on what you just had mentioned. I think that you're 100% correct. I mean, the CISOs and their teams, they have in mind something or some skills that they would like to have when they hire a new talent. And those skills most oftentimes are, of course, some technical level of familiarity, of course, with the systems and with networks and computer and so on. But also, many of the CISOs I'm talking to are looking for individuals who are able to think critically. And I think that is something that folks are not really emphasizing enough. And I think, by you talking about scholarship and the importance of scholarship, you're 100% correct, because I think that at the end of the day, what this program, and I hope other programs like this one, who potentially can follow up with what we're doing, bring into the table, is this really rigorous or desire to implement rigorous scientific standards in understanding what works and what doesn't. Because if you think about it, and we're doing this because this is our mission, so to speak, and understand what works and what doesn't. If you think about it, you have more than 2,600 companies, cybersecurity companies, right now, all over the world. Right, the majority of them are focused and operates here in the United States, who offer those chief information security officers and their team wide range of tools to help ameliorate some of the issues that those CISOs experience. And as you know, and I hope and I assume many of your listeners know, it's at this point it's very difficult to get to those CISOs and just start a conversation with them because of that issue, right? Because they get bombarded with companies sending them emails on a daily basis, twice a day, right, about their product and about the mission and about whatever they bring and how they can improve the security posture and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, if you think about it, there's a lake of evidence, empirical evidence, scientific evidence produced by an objective organization, right? Someone who doesn't really, organization who is not being supported, right, by those companies, who will essentially validate and vouch for those companies' performances. And this is essentially what we want to teach our students, how to do, right? So I agree with you. The technical skill is very important, but the critical thinking, about how to do things and how to evaluate things, how to test whether things really work or not, right, in a rigorous way, that is the important thing that we bring as scholars, cybersecurity scholars, who are focused on the human, we can talk about maybe later, into this program. And I think that's a very important point to emphasize. Now, in terms of your actual question, our program has room for it for 30 students in each round that we'll have, and we got funding for 2 years. Funding will be spent over 2 summers between July and August, between June and August. I'm sorry. The plan is for us to have 20 undergraduate students and 10 graduate students from all over the southern region of the United States. And what we expect and what we hope will happen is that during this 8 weeks long workshop, if you want, we will teach our students the evidence-based cybersecurity principles. We will equip the students with knowledge about humans, about human behavior in cyberspace, about research methods, of course. And then we're going to marry them, simultaneously, right? We're going to marry them with the CISO, who will talk to them about the tools, teach them about those tools and the kind of data that those tools can produce. And then together, we will be able to sort of come up with students and potential future employees who are more equipped to deal with the cybersecurity challenges that the industry essentially experiences. The industry, the government essentially experiences on a daily basis. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, I firmly believe, kind of to your point, that we're going to get much more internship based in a lot of the technology that we teach. I think it's just going to have to be because there's so much knowledge that's stuck in people's brains, especially in the generation that's graying out. And I think marrying that young generation with that older generation from a knowledge perspective is going to make a huge, huge difference moving forward. And you hear all this talk about artificial intelligence and how AI is taking everything over, but realistically, AI cannot think like a human. It's very fixed in what it can sort out. And in the cybersecurity space, there are some things that AI is pretty easy to predict and pretty easy to pick the pieces and parts, from a standpoint, but it still takes somebody just to give it a pair of eyes to sort of sort that out, which is why this whole matching and the environment that you've set up where people can really sit there and work on that critical thinking piece is going to be so important for them moving forward.
I agree, because if you think about machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's really important when you construct the tool and you sort of construct the system to sort of draw upon the artificial intelligence and the machine learning algorithm, how to make assessments and how to sort of nudge the tool to perform. So far, the way we understand it, those tools have been configured to use knowledge which has been sort of produced by those really talented security officers and their team. Their, of course, their professional background, their ideas about how things should be. And based on that, the tools will sort of assess the reality, sort of speaking, and then propose a potential, nudge, right, for the system to sort of, change or respond to a specific, stimulus that it experiences. I think that with the approach that we bring, the evidence-based cybersecurity approach, that flip things their end. I mean, they supplement it. They say, okay, it's really important for us to rely on professional backgrounds. It's cool that you guys are using your past experiences, but when you sort of configure the tools, right? But it's only your past experiences. I mean, it could be that you have a unique experience, and that's why you think that the tool will or should be configured in a specific way or another. But it could be that your experience is so unique that if you configure the tool in that way, the tool will not be effective in achieving its goal. And so the evidence-based cybersecurity approach essentially calls for us to move away from relying only on professional background, right? Or on so those chief information security officers and the security teams' histories, right? And move into a model in which the tools, the AI algorithms, the machine learning algorithm will be configured based on evidence from the field, rigorous scientific evidence from the field, which will be collected, using, I shouldn't say complicated research design, but I should say scientific research design. We love experiments, right? So, that is, in my mind, the golden standard of academic research. So, running experiments in order to really understand what works and what doesn't simply makes sense, right? In the context of testing a new drug or testing a new policies. I think that that's essentially what we should do in the context of the cybersecurity field. And once we have this knowledge, then we can feed it into those AI or machine learning algorithm, which potentially could help improve our security posture. Now, this is an empirical question again that we're going to have to test, but this is some of the tools that our students will be equipped with once they graduate from our program.
Yeah, and there's been lots and lots of studies that have shown that AI carries the bias of the coders and whoever programs the machine. So if everybody learns the exact same way, there's zero diversity of thought in how the coding works. There's zero diversity from a troubleshooting, look at it different way perspective. So it almost is a very linear method to get from point A to point B through AI. Whereas if you bring about multiple different experiences and multiple different paths into that equation and how it's programmed, it can only be better.
I agree. So, in my view, it's important to bring more science into this discipline, into the cybersecurity discipline. So we should, again, move away from those biases you just mentioned. And I'm familiar with that line of research, right? We should move away from that model into a model in which we use scientific evidence from field experiments, from research design where we draw on survey methodology, from rigorous observations, right, of how people respond to the tools to really configure those AI and machine learning based security tools that are being offered for sale by many of the vendors out there right now.
Well, and we've all heard that saying, in order to catch a crook, you have to think like a crook. And so if you're trained how to think about a certain topic, which is not the way the crook thinks, you're never going to catch him. And being able to just throw some stuff in a pile and work backwards through it and see how that works, I think is really going to sort of set this whole cybersecurity industry on air a bit, because I think there's a few things that come into play. One, like you said, the CISOs and their teams are very reliant on the software packages that they use and what the vendors bring to the table. And that definitely, I would say, cuts out a chunk of the equation, right? It catches the low-hanging fruit in a lot of cases if you pick the right package. Now, that doesn't mean that should be your only package. And I think as we move forward with all kinds of data, it really takes somebody paying attention to who the vendors are, but you have to sort of walk the walk and talk the talk in order to be able to say, well, this package is doing a great job for X, but that doesn't mean we need it for Y, because there might be something better for Y, and there might be something better for Z. And the best approaches in a lot of cases for cybersecurity are a very layered approach anyway, where it's multiple tools and multiple things that are configured together. And we've sort of gotten to the point in this industry where we're so reactionary that we don't give ourselves enough time to plan ahead, to see what's out there, to really use RFI cycles, for instance, to find out what all the capabilities are, because this vendor has done really good for us for 10 years, so we're just going to keep with them for 10 years. And then we find out there's a vulnerability somewhere else. Right now, remote work is a great example of that, right? Look at all these people that used to be working in a corporate office building, and now they're remote work somewhere else. And a lot of these unsavory characters are getting in through home VPNs, through open Wi-Fi's, and we now have devices that are connected in not the best ways. And we're not necessarily monitoring VPN usage. We're not monitoring where our data goes. And so I think coming out of this whole thing, the timing for your program is really pretty amazing. Probably not intentional, but amazing in that we're just looking at a different set of facts and figures right now than we were even 6 months ago.
I agree. I think the timing is great. It was not intentional, Kerry, because we submitted the proposal to NSF in early January, and we only heard back from them a month ago. So, it wasn't intentional. Nobody had in mind what we are experiencing right now in terms of the pandemic. But I agree 100%. I think that, taking into consideration the ecosystem within which we all sort of operate, and the key actors that use the ecosystem to sort of support the mission of their organizations and their livelihood, is key in tailoring the right security solutions, the most effective security solution. I mean, those are the right security solution, at least in my mind, the most effective security solutions to companies, the most effective policies to companies, because at the end of the day, I mean, you talked about, layered cybersecurity defenses and, many vendors out there, and the fact that some organizations are essentially capable of, willing, as well as have the resources to support a very complicated cybersecurity posture by simply purchasing tools. But, right now we're all experiencing difficulties, right? We all work with limited budgets. And I assume that even those huge corporations, right, who used to invest tons of money in cybersecurity solutions will face difficulties finding resources to simply buy everything. And so I think the approach we need to take, and the approach that those organizations maybe are now in a better place, better position to start thinking about, is what works and what doesn't. Do I need to spend millions of dollars simply buying everything in order to comply with, NIST framework? Or, maybe I should test what works and what doesn't. And based on what works and what doesn't, I'll make some assessment, make some decisions with respect to how my security posture should look like. Who said that I need to, purchase a device for $500,000 that will, at the end of the day, once I deploy it, send millions of false positives a day and only 4 minor, indications for events that actually happen, right? Who said that I have to deploy it? At the end of the day, at least in my mind, when we engage in cybersecurity, when we're trying to improve the cybersecurity posture, we need to understand what works and what doesn't. And the only way to do that is by understanding the ecosystem, spending more time understanding how humans respond to these technologies. And by human, I'm not necessarily saying only the employees, and the security team, but what I also have in mind, are the bad guys, right? The hackers, the individuals who are out there to get you. Law enforcement agencies as well. I mean, how they respond to all those technologies, right? I mean, so all this is, I think, are very important factors that folks, maybe weren't thinking about in the past before the pandemic. But with tight budgets now, maybe we'll be in a better position to reflect and sort of implement, hopefully, in the context of their organization.
Well, and the whole landscape is changing too. If you look at the number of images of people that have been scraped off the internet, that's facial recognition to pretty much all of our daily lives. And I think anybody that thinks they have a shred of privacy nowadays is probably a bit delusional, but unless they're completely unplugged. But the point is that it is an ever-changing landscape. I mean, what's working today, there's a really good chance it's not going to work tomorrow. And unfortunately, in the world of cybersecurity, you find out that it's not working when there's been a breach. And you talked a bit about how much data that you can get. And there's a big difference between getting data and getting actionable data. And the problem is when you hide actionable data in a whole bunch of pieces of other the boy who cried wolf data, is that the actionable data gets completely ignored, overlooked, missed, and then that's when you're at your most vulnerable.
I agree. I think that's a very well taken point. The question, though, Carrie, is how do we assess actionable data? What do you have in mind essentially when you're talking about actionable data, and what are the expectations from the company once you have such an actionable data? You know what I mean? I mean, so to me, even focusing and reflecting on that specific question is a really interesting intellectual challenge. Because people talk about actionable data. What does it mean? So maybe I'll ask you, okay, what does it mean? What do you mean by actionable data?
Well, for me, actionable data is something that provides you enough information that you can take an action on it. So it's something that's not noise. It's something that gives you a genuine warning or a genuine indication that something needs to be addressed. And if we just comb through logs from a software package or the stuff that comes out that maybe doesn't really mean anything, the danger there is that the one bit of information you really need is lost and hidden in the mire of stuff.
So let me so this is great. I mean, so this is essentially what most of the people I talk to think about when we discuss actionable data. But let me ask you the following question, Carrie. What is the probability in your mind that specific, what you call actionable data, will actually lead to an event? And we can take it even a step further and ask minor or very severe type of an event. But do you have any probabilities in mind there?
Well, probabilities and risk that's the big chunk of what IT people do, right? Figure out what is the probability that this could happen. And I think in some cases there's some low hanging fruit that definitely would lead to that. human beings as a whole, though, we're just really trusting people. And we assume that maybe it won't. But when you start looking at things really more forensically, I think that you have some of that risk knowledge. So,
As a scientist, I have difficulty with this response, because I mean, you're telling me I'm looking at cases, and then based on the number of cases I use, and you never said how many cases you're looking at, I will be able to assign a probability for this specific type of what I call actionable data to actually result in a minor or serious event. And in science, we don't work this way, right? I mean, we do not, I mean, we don't work based, I mean, some of us do work based on hunches, and then write amazing papers and what have you. But in order for me as a scientist to tell you that this is really actionable, that this is really data that you should be worried about, this is really, threat that, can take over your entire organization, that, I need to quantify it in some kind of a way that will allow me to assign a probability, right? And that is essentially, what I'm missing right now in the field. I understand many people sort of, looking at some data that in the past they've seen in, one case or another case that they were working on, and say, based on my experience, I think that this, whatever I found right now, the whatever threat that I'm facing right now, because someone has been talking about me on the darknet, may result in, an attack on the organization, or data being taken from my employees, or and so on and so forth. But to me, the missing link is the actual evidence, the actual causal relationship between the data and an actual event.
well, I guess that was kind of the point that I was getting at, is that it takes somebody, a person, because we don't have computers that can do that yet, to really sit down and to start analyzing some of that. If something floats to the top as a potential threat, somebody needs to look at that and determine, do they think it's going to be a threat for the organization? And that, I think, is where the crux of a lot of these jobs is going to be so critical and so important moving forward, because somebody's going to have to be the steward of that data and the steward of the actions that result from different threats that happen. We just can't give them a haystack and then say, go find a needle. What we need to do is give them a small pile of hay, or a few blades of hay that then you can go analyze. And I think that's what's so cool about your program, is that it really is evidence based, and it's sort of, it's almost working backwards from the way security happens now, because you really get to triage what happened, and you get to triage and build those critical thinking skills, so that these students can move forward and do something a little bit different than the traditional CISO type training that they've received in school.
And I agree. I think that's exactly what we're trying to bring. And this assessment that specific individual will need to make, right, in the face of data, could be actionable, could be irrelevant data, is essentially what we're trying to build, right? I mean, what's important, what's relevant, what do we have scientific evidence that actually can lead to a specific minor or serious cybersecurity event, and what do we have no evidence or no data that will indicate that? In my mind, that could save a lot of money to organizations, right? Because they, again, in my mind, it will allow them to focus their cybersecurity efforts even further, and draw heavily on scientific evidence from the field with respect to what works and what doesn't. And if you think about the new sort of type of employees, the cybersecurity employees we build, those employees, in my mind, again, will be also able to come up with those assessments and conduct their own scientific research. They don't have to publish it, right? But they can conduct that scientific research on their own. Once they have the skills, once they have the know-how, once they take into consideration the cybercrime ecosystem, as we call it, once they understand their organization technology and the goals of their organization, they will be able to do it themselves. And that is, in my mind, and I think that our advisory board and many of the CISOs that we've discussed with program, as well as simply talking to them, that is what missing right now in the field.
So talk people through a little bit about how you start. Let's assume that you've got project A on the table. How do you envision starting from the evidence side? How do you envision that working through to coming up with something really cool at the end of the day? Talk about the kind of steps and processes and how it's a little bit different than the way things are done today.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So one of the cool things that our group has that I'm not sure how many other groups actually possess is our own computer network. The university, from obvious reason, based on type of research that we conduct, which is of course very much related to this specific program, the university did not allow us to have our own network. So we had to sort of open our own infrastructure in order to conduct the type of work that we would like to engage in as a group. That gives us a really cool cyber infrastructure that allows us to play with things. It allows us to deploy different technology. It allows us to be in various areas of the net, of the dark net, of the deep web, which are very complicated for folks to be in across their academic career, because schools are not thrilled with you using their network to go and dive the darknet and talk to people on the darknet. And so we have that. And that is a really cool advantage, if you want, that our group has, because we have this infrastructure that allow us to do all those things. So, one potential project relates to threat intelligence of a company. If we just, try to sort of come up with an idea for a project, will be okay. I want to see, if I'm a CISO, I really want to see, if I'm a CISO of a bank, whether the darknet vendor mentioning of my customers' names, like the fact that the vendors in the darknet have my bank credit cards information or customers information or whatever, really influence my security posture, right? If folks are talking about my bank in the darknet on a daily basis, is it really correlated with an increase on the number of attacks that I'm seeing? Is it really correlated with fraud reports that my customers submit on a daily basis? I mean, simply trying to understand what the threat intelligence, whether the threat intelligence that is provided by many of those companies is really effective, right? So folks will be able to work with our students who will be working for those companies during those internship program to answer those questions. Another question that companies will be able to answer is, I have a tool that I'm really interested in deploying in my organization, but I want to see that the tool is really effective in accomplishing the goals I have for it. I mean, of course, the tool has their own goals, but every CISO and every security team have an idea with respect to what they hope the tool will do for the organization. I don't want to experiment, of course, as a CISO, right? I don't want to experiment with my organization, but here I have this really cool cyber infrastructure with a student who works for me during the summer and who's getting paid to test the effectiveness of a tool. So during the 2 months period of time, we will be able, as the organization, right, who support or participate in the internship program, we will maybe design a small replica of the organization, deploy on the cybersecurity infrastructure that GSU offered to this evidence-based cybersecurity research group, and then get some results with respect to the effectiveness of a tool in accomplishing the goals that I have for it. This is essentially how I see an engagement, a potential engagement between the companies and our group. In a way, the students, the interns, will facilitate that relationship, because we're going to equip the students with all the tools, scientific tools, sort of speaking, that will allow them to test those policies and tools. And then once they go on the companies, and they work with those CISOs on different issues, different problems that they're trying to address, they will be able to bring this technology and test it, with us on our infrastructure. That is essentially the type of engagement that I see.
Yeah, I think just being able to build that critical thinking is going to be so great for this whole industry moving forward. I really applaud your efforts in this pilot. So tell us now, if somebody wants more information, or if there's a student out there that is interested in the scholarship for this, or how to get in touch with folks at your program just through Georgia State. And certainly I'll put a link in there, but what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So on our website, ebcs.gsu.edu, we talk about the internship program, and we actually have a webpage, which is designated for both students and companies to apply and participate in this program. So again, ebcs.gsu.edu. We speak a lot, right, about this mentorship program on our social media platform, Twitter, LinkedIn. We're on those platforms as well. So, it's a good way to connect with us. So by all means, just look us up there, and just visit us on ebcs.gsu.edu. There will be more details about the program, and there will be specific emails you'll be able to email addresses you'll be able to send your queries to. We're more than happy to respond, as well as for students. There will be there's a web page right now where the students can actually submit their application to participate in the program. For companies, the process is a little more complicated, because we want to make sure that our program is essentially in line with what the company is looking for. So we're going to have some conversation, and then sign a document that essentially indicates that the company is interested in teaming up with us and the internship program. But for students, the application process is pretty straightforward.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that'll be helpful for all the people that are sitting in vehicles right now listening to this that don't have a piece of paper they can, or the links will certainly be below when you guys look at the podcast description. So David, I absolutely want to thank you for your insight, your time this morning. I think it's been most beneficial. I'm sure everybody listening will get a lot out of it.
Thank you so much, Gary, again for having me. I had a blast participating in this podcast.